Good afternoon and welcome to Strasbourg, where we continue once again with our series of interviews with prominent politicians here in Europe, and I'm pleased to be with Andrew Brons, MEP for the Yorkshire and Humber region, and of course Nick Griffin for the North West. We're going to base our discussion today on this document, which is the final draft agenda for the session 14th to the 17th of February. I'll start with you, Andrew, and what do you think of the contents this time round?
Well, there's a lasting, that is a surviving story, that once I pushed the driver out of his seat, got hold of the driving wheel, pushed my foot to the floor, wanting to get there so quickly because of the excitement of the agenda.
Yes.
Well, that might or might not have happened in reality, but it didn't happen this week.
It didn't?
No. I looked down here at the various items on the agenda and thought, are we sure we were due in this week? Anyway, when I arrived, I thought my fortunes were about to change. I was told that one of my colleagues, one of my continental colleagues, had agreed to give me some of his speaking time. Now, speaking time's a valuable commodity. People don't usually give it up, only if there's an election pending. There was the Barnsley election, but this particular issue didn't look as if it was going to loom large there. The title of it was Enhanced Cooperation in the Area of Unitary Patent Protection. My first reaction was, how kind of our colleague to hand me this over. And then I sort of delved through the recesses of my soul and tried to think what my instinctive views were on enhanced cooperation in the area of unitary patent protection, and while still muttering how kind, I'm afraid I gave it up. And looking through the rest of it, implementation of the Services Directive, and a very interesting discussion that was going on in my AFCO committee about different interpretations of 56.3, 56.4 and 50 of the Code of Procedure, I felt really this week wasn't going to be the best.
No, I must admit, having looked at the agenda myself, having a subversive mind, as you may have noticed in the past, I find it a little on the uninspiring side. But it's good to see you, Andrew, back in good health and back batting for the British National Party here in Strasbourg. And I think many of our viewers will be very, very pleased to see you back in action. Switching to you, Nick, I mean, your Envy Committee deals with some of the carbon hysteria that rattles its way through this place, and we were presented this week with Martin Callinan's report. Martin Callinan is a Tory, on the reduction of carbon dioxide from light commercial vehicles, that's transits and sprinters and whatever, and you had quite a bit to say about that, and it was the first time you'd ever interacted with one of the other MEPs. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, well, this, it's, as you say, it's all about carbon hysteria, and it's disguised as an environmental necessity. It is, of course, about taxing ordinary people. It's another form of taxation. It would add potentially several £1,000s to the cost of every single light commercial vehicle. These are the vehicles driven by and identified with white van man, and absolutely essential to small businesses, to haulage companies and so on. Very much a key part, in fact, of the economy, really involving lots of ordinary people. And they're saying that, oh, these things are chucking out carbon, which is, of course, nature's greatest and most effective fertiliser. And something's got to be done, and really there's two threads to what they're trying to do. The first is simply to fine the manufacturers for every gram of carbon that they'll put out over a certain amount, quite a low target. And the second is to fit them, as part of reducing this, to fit them with speed inhibitors. These are the things that the big lorries already have, which is why when you see one lorry trying to overtake each other, it's very often crawling past at this sort of rate. They can't actually go any faster than that. They're governed, that's all they can do. So they want to impose the same thing on vans, and there's several problems here. The big picture is that they start, this is Pastor Niemuller's thing, that first they came for one group and I did nothing, and then they came, and in the end there's no one left to come for me. Well, first they come for the big juggernauts, then for the lorries, then they come for white van man, and then in the end, every car is fitted with a speed inhibitor.
That's exactly it.
Is the thing, and it's done under the guise of carbon concerns. It's partly, in the end, an attack on motorists, and it's certainly not a safety feature, because you think of the number of times that you have to drive faster to overtake safely. You have to drive in an emergency fast to get out of trouble, and this option simply wouldn't be available. So it's a very, very, very bad precedent. And it's Middle England, the working people, our core voters, who are going to get it in the neck this time. So, as you say, I had something to say about it. I actually got 2 minutes. Was my share,
lucky you.
My share on this. I gather that it's already up out there on the internet and on the website, being quite popular. Because I suppose in the end I highlighted 2 points. The first was that I'd sat through this whole debate, and no one used the words global warming. Anymore. Completely gone. Now they talk about climate change, only ever climate change, not global warming, and they're increasingly saying, oh, this is a fuel efficiency measure, rather than pretending rather than saying what it really is, which is about carbon. Now, if they were seriously worried about fuel efficiency, they'd go right back to scratch. I believe this does need doing, because if you actually look at the amount of energy that a car's using to transport you as the driver or your passengers, it's a couple of percent. All the rest of the energy is used just to carry the car, because they're monumentally heavy. Now, that's because they were first designed in the days when steel was the only sensible substance to use. But carbon fibre is stronger than steel, and a fraction of the weight. And if they were serious about dealing with the amount of energy that vehicles use, they start pushing down the road of getting car bodies built in carbon fibre, safer, no more expensive, not cheaper, and a fraction of the weight, therefore far more efficient. But that's not what they're interested in with the CO2. The whole CO2 scam is about making money for the people trading in carbon, and it's about controlling ordinary people. So I spoke first of all about the fact that how ironic was they no longer talk about global warming, even though that's where all this comes from. And then secondly, as we were specifically talking about vehicles, I drew attention to the kind of vehicles that are 4 stories below us.
They're very nice vehicles, aren't they?
They're very nice vehicles indeed. And when I said that you're sitting here and downstairs you've got your Mercs and your BMWs and all Porsches and all these big SUVs.
Brabus, Mercedes, AMGs,
there's
very
some cracking
nice
vehicles down there. And yet the same people driving here in those are the ones who, with utter hypocrisy, are preparing to drive potentially thousands of ordinary fellas out of business by putting extra costs on their vans, because they're only the ordinary little guy and he doesn't count. It revolts me, it really does.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew, how do you feel about what I refer to as the Trabantisation of our vehicles? In other words, to what is eventually going to be a standardisation where we all run around in little bubble cars that are monitored and restricted and whatever.
It's part of a sort of new Puritanism. Might, on the part of some of them, be fuelled, if that's not an unfortunate term to use, by real, if in some cases misguided, concerns for the environment. But in other cases, it's a sort of hair shirt mentality. The idea that we should really feel terribly guilty about the wealth that the Western world's produced, and in some ways we've got to punish ourselves for having that.
Masochism, isn't it, really?
Yes, a form of that, of sort of self-driven deprivation, in order that we can empathise more with those poorer fellow world citizens.
Exactly.
Something else interesting, sort of connected with carbon, has come out in the news just the last couple of days. Actually, it's a piece of really good news that the Dutch government, who are one of the main ones going down the wind farm alternative energy route, they've now finally worked out or admitted that these wind factories are not only thoroughly unsightly but also grotesquely inefficient and really simply not fit for purpose. And so they're now saying that they're going to have to switch and supply more of Holland's energy with nuclear plants, and even the British government now has just decided to follow suit. So we've been saying it for several years, but Cameron and co yet again are stealing, or at least bits of another British National Party policy, which is to stop destroying the uplands and the coasts of Britain with these monstrous wind farms, and to realise that if they actually want cheap and reliable energy, then a new generation of ultra-safe nuclear plants, which are entirely possible. I wouldn't want them building a Chernobyl anywhere in Britain, but no one's going to build a Chernobyl. They're going to build, very high-tech, very, very safe nuclear plants now. Certainly, it's likely now we're going to get a second one in Sellafield in my constituency, and everybody there locally is desperate for it because they need the jobs and Britain needs the energy, and we don't want places like Cumbria covered in wind farms. And for the government to be backtracking, it's late, but it's better late than never. So I'd urge all our people who are involved, and quite a few are, in campaigns against wind farms, to realise that we're not now fighting a losing battle. You're just trying to slow them down or whatever. We're winning. So every local community now whose landscapes are threatened by wind farms, now's the time to put the pressure on to get them stopped, because we've only got to hold it a little bit longer. I think the whole thing will unravel and they'll go back to common sense in energy.
Yeah. Changing the subject entirely, we've got a debate coming up on Hungarian media law, and it's been made more pertinent by the fact that the Hungarians are now the presidents, aren't they? There's a Hungarian president here.
President of the council, yes.
Yeah, president of the council. And there was a huge debate last time we were here about this media law. And you're going to say something about it. You can perhaps preempt.
Yes, I'm going to start actually by referring to the accounts of the law itself. To begin with, it prescribes balanced coverage. Well, what are they frightened about there? A law insisting on balanced coverage. That sounds all right on the face of it. Another part of it talks about fining publications for violating public interest, public morals or order. Now, a little bit more wary about those. These terms are vague and therefore dangerous. As vague as, if I could think of a word, xenophobia or racism. And whoever would think about legislating against such vague concepts as those? But of course, I'm going to go on then and say, well, before we start pointing the finger at the present Hungarian government, perhaps we ought to look closer at home at the activities of the British Brainwashing Corporation that systematically excludes our own party, the British National Party, from appearance on discussion programmes, but includes the ridiculous Establishment Safety Valve Party that is gratuitously and quite lavishly overrepresented. I think they've lost count of the number of times that Mr Farage has appeared on Question Time.
Probably at least 11, the way I...
Something of that sort, yes. Of course, our own party is significant enough to be attacked, not once every week, but usually several times each week, but it's not significant enough to feature on the programme. Bit of a contradiction there. But of course, this is the same BBC that only 5 years ago tried to get our chairman here jailed. Not embarrassed a little bit, not subject to a small fine, but jailed for speaking the truth.
For 7 years?
Yes, for speaking the truth about some of the offshoots of the problems of the wonderful, diverse society that we have.
It's sickening, really. There's no other word for it. And when you see this kind of hypocrisy that comes through, I mean, from somebody who faced 7 years twice. They did try to do it. They weren't happy with the first verdict, so they tried again, didn't they? How do you feel about that when you're having to go along with this ridiculous facade, almost? Someone who really was, as I say, pretty much nearly destroyed. You could have been destroyed. You could have still been in prison now, couldn't you, if it had been for the BBC? And yet we're debating laws in Hungary as if there's nothing the matter with our own system.
Well, this is a common thread here. Every single session there's attacks on other countries, third countries, for infringements of human rights. Very rarely, although to be fair, occasionally somewhere like Cuba, a communist state, but usually it's Iran or Russia. And our colleague Bruno Gollnisch from the Front National tried to speak earlier on this week, actually, in this session, and when they were discussing human rights abuses and restrictions on freedom of speech in Russia, he started talking about precisely these things happening when they're happening within the European Union. And he was stopped because this wasn't the point. and as near as damn it told, there are no abuses of human rights in any countries within the European Union, which is, it's phenomenal. As you say, it's pure hypocrisy. Coming back directly to the question of the media side, of course, it's not just, Andrew was quite right about the BBC and their attempt to jail me, but also one of the provisions of the Hungarian law that is being complained about is, in effect, 5 overseers whose job it is to ensure fair and impartial coverage will control the media. Now, as a matter of fact, if they did oversee a regime of strict impartiality and a right of reply for people such as ourselves or the far left, whoever abused, if they have a right of reply, it'd be a good thing. If that's what they were doing, who on earth could complain? It would be a thoroughly good thing. But even if they weren't, even if these 5 presumably men in grey suits were to abuse their power in Hungary, would it really make the position in Hungary any different, say, to Britain, where Rupert Murdoch, one man, controls the paper of record, the paper of the masses, and what's probably now the most popular news television channel? He's got immense power, Rupert Murdoch, but as he's bought it, as he's a super international capitalist, no one here minds. Whereas if the Hungarians, and it is after all a Hungarian government, which for all its faults, has a democratic mandate from a huge majority of the Hungarian people. So if that's what they want to do democratically, then it's none of our business, and it's certainly not for us to say that it's a shocking system until it's been tried, and then we see whether it's any worse than the rotten, lousy system that we've got in Britain and which we've got in the rest of Europe.
Yeah, it's made worse with the BBC in that we have to pay for the service, don't we? We have to pay. It's like if you want to read The Guardian, for instance, you have to pay the Times to actually... and I don't think that's sustainable, to be honest. I mean, the problem that the BBC have got is they have a legal charter for due impartiality. And
which they flout.
They do. Constantly flout. But it goes beyond the presentation of news and current affairs. It works its way into light programming as well, doesn't it? That undercurrent of Marxism and political correctness, where we see that replicated in soap operas and whatever. And I've
had a confirmation of this from a producer, I won't be more specific than that, who said, yes, we do indeed have a shopping list of items that have got to come into it. Feminism, disability, disability is a real issue. There ought to be programmes about disability, but the idea that disability should intrude into every programme, whether it's Gardener's Question Time or the news quiz, is absolutely ridiculous. It's obsessive behaviour. And they have this list of things that many of them we would regard as the politically correct list, and somehow these things have got to be woven in, or a fair selection of them got to be woven into each programme. And you can almost conduct a quiz. You can turn Radio 4 on, you can sit there with your piece of paper and with your list of things, and you can tick them off as they go through. Now, if you think I used Gardener's Question Time, well, he was exaggerating a bit there. Well, no. I'm not the most avid gardener. Indeed, I'm not a gardener at all. But I do sometimes listen to it. It's a slight refreshment from some of the other Radio 4 programmes. And I was listening to a trip to, I think it was Kew Gardens. Very interesting indeed. Until they brought us round to the gardener who was in charge of that particular department, and then commented on his refugee status and gave a little bit of a clue. That ticked a box. Absolutely nothing to do with Gardener's Question Time. Would have been regarded as a ridiculous diversion to the average listener. But it's an example.
Perhaps we could turn this, Simon. You're a man with some experience in the horse world and so on and so forth. Well, could we run some kind of a betting sweepstake on this? We could pick a specific programme and say, well, how many minutes would it take before they mention gay, lesbian, transgender? How many minutes before we get something to do with immigration and asylum seeking and so on? And if you manage to get all 5 right, you win an enormous jackpot. I think it could be quite popular.
I wouldn't like to be the bookmaker. Let's put it like that. I wouldn't like to bankroll it. But more seriously, does it not sometimes frustrate you that more people can't see this kind of subliminal brainwashing that goes on within the media?
Well, I think, as a matter of fact, a lot of them do get it in any case. But yeah, it is frustrating. And I know people have asked for years, why won't they wake up? And several books I've been reading recently, I think, really explain why and what the problem is. And it's a phenomenon called social proof. And this is that people take their cue, and it's a natural sort of herd instinct that keeps people safe from making mistakes. If the rest of the herd is doing something, if you go along with it, 9 times out of 10 you'll make the right decision, whereas if you make your own mind up, 5 times out of 10 you'll make the wrong decision. Yes. So social proof is there. People see a problem. They've done experiments where they've had someone pretending to be injured lying in the street. And if they do that with 1 or 2 people walking past, they always stop and help. If they do it with 10 or 12 people walking past, the one person who's the real target in the group only sometimes stops. If they do it when the one person they're looking at is in a group of 100, they never stop. Because they look, and if the rest of the herd isn't stopping and thinking something's wrong and I must do something, then they don't either. So they know something's wrong, but unless someone else starts to do something about it, they don't. The moment one person goes over and helps, then other people rush in. But that's the problem. It's not the British people being obtuse or cowardly or stupid. It's just a natural human thing that you wait and see what everyone else around you is doing, which is what the BBC and the likes of them, they know. This is why there's this, Andrew referred to it as obsessive, this absolute brutal repetition of the proper politically correct way that you must behave and think, because they know if they stop, because it is unnatural. The moment people start to think for themselves and make their own decisions, and people who make their own decisions are visible to other people, that's when it all comes undone. That's why they hate, for instance, our enormous reach now, I believe, on the internet, because it's an alternative media which is giving more and more people the chance to take their social cue from other real people and not the fictitious characters, which of course is exactly what they are, that you have on soap operas, whether it's the Archers or EastEnders and so on. So I think we're at a fascinating time in history when the old, or the moderately recent way of providing social proof through a controlled mass media is potentially on the verge of breaking down.
Yeah, I think...
Yes. I mean, if you think some of Nick's theorising there sounded a little bit far-fetched, sort of herd instinct and so on, there is an academic background to this. It's known as conformity experiments. It was started off by Solomon Asch from one of the Ivy League universities, I forget which, and then followed on by the next generation, headed by Stanley Milgram. I'm not going to go into the detail of it, but where effectively they managed to convince the guinea pig among their number to conform to the others against the evidence of his own eyes. Now, if you can do that with a simple experiment, the idea of simply getting people to conform to accepting certain forms of proper behaviour is quite credible. There's nothing incredible about it or fantastic about it at all. What Nick described is exactly how animals of all kinds, from human beings downwards, act and react to situations. As he said, follow the herd, and 95% of the time you'll be safe. Break away from the herd and there's a much greater chance that you won't.
No, it's an enormous subject. It really is. It's highly complex, and we're probably the only people prepared to actually put forward a contrary opinion to the actual mechanism that controls people's minds politically in our country. Isn't it?
Part of the problem here, and it is a problem of the nationalist movement, and for that matter the Conservatives, who, for all that we don't agree with them on many things, should have stood up to political correctness. All of us, from probably taking our lead from Peter Simple, who wrote to me once when I was first put on trial, with a very nice letter of support quite a few years ago in the Telegraph. He created this idea in the eyes of traditionalists and the people on the right that sociology was a joke degree. We used to typically talk about the far left demonstrators opposing us in the 1970s as all sociology students, and we wrote sociology off. Now the left and the people running the entire British establishment. They sucked all this knowledge, and as Andrew said, it's all on what I was saying about the herd mentality and so on. It's all based on solid scientific experiments and evidence as to how people are controlled, and we are now just beginning to talk about how it's done. The people who run the British mass media and the American mass media and the mass media here, they've known how it's been done for years, and they've been doing it with absolute ruthlessness.
Yes. Now, you said that nobody's noticed it. I find that once the subject's brought up, then people will then react and explain it. I think what's happened isn't so much that they've missed the point, but they've got out of the habit of discussing it because they feel that that leads onto dangerous territory. But let's forget about the ordinary people. Let's talk about the broadcasters themselves. Andrew Marr, absolutely a model of liberal correctness, admitted, I think it was 5 years ago, 2005, 2006, that liberalism was a sort of firm strand throughout the BBC. He admitted it and approved of it. I mean, this was almost like the sort of Carol Quigley of broadcasting, of somebody who sort of wrote it all up and said, yes, this is a jolly good idea.
This is when he specifically said that there's certain natural instincts which can be repressed, and he's a vigorous believer in state repression.
Yes.
Stunning for a supposed liberal.
Yeah. Much more recently, of course, we've heard from Peter Sissons. I think no longer a key figure in broadcasting, at least with the BBC, but he has previously, I think, hosted Question Time. So we're talking about a key figure. And he was saying, I think the expression he used was that liberalism was in the DNA of the BBC. What he was suggesting isn't that there was a conspiracy, but a consensus, a series of assumptions within the BBC, an assumption that the Guardian view should prevail over any other view, that the nurture view should prevail over the nature view or the nature explanation. Or I've heard a particular example, if you like, that the optimistic view of human nature should always, and I'm not suggesting the opposite should be the case, should always prevail over the pessimistic view of human nature. These are assumptions, they're not rules, because people don't think of disobeying them. They're simply programmed to follow them.
And I think you're right, and it appears to be so strong that from time to time their conscious brain says, this isn't quite right and we've got to sort this. So several times we've had key figures in the BBC saying, for instance, that we've got to stop being so narrow-minded, we've got to have people we don't agree with on, such as the British National Party. They say it's going to happen, and we wait, and nothing happens. So if they didn't, I don't think they're saying it for effect, because to say it raises the expectation something will be done. So it doesn't help. They do better to shut up about it. So I think they genuinely, every now and again, think we actually need to represent the white working class and the tax-paying middle class, the traditionalists. We need to give them a bit of a crack of the whip. Otherwise, it's so obvious that there's a bias that it makes it. They're not doing this out of the goodness of their hearts. They understand it's actually dangerous to them, that more and more people switch off and will use the internet and think for themselves. But what their conscious brain tells them, look, this is crazy, we're not going to get away with this much longer, then their instincts, the DNA takes over, and they immediately go back to, British National Party, can't have them on, certain things can't be discussed, and they close up again. It's fascinating to watch.
misquote St. Augustine, it's please make me democratic and truly liberal, but not yet.
And on that basis, that brings us to the end of our first part, which you'll find on BNPtv. Unless, of course, the BBC relent out of guilt and give us their own show.